The fluorescent lights above felt like needles piercing through Amara's skull as her eyes fluttered open. Her mouth tasted like copper and regret, though she couldn't remember why. The ceiling was unfamiliar, pristine white with crown molding that spoke of money, the kind she'd never had. She tried to sit up, but her body protested with a deep ache that settled into her bones. Where was she? Amara's breath caught as she took in her surroundings. The bedroom was enormous, decorated in shades of charcoal and cream, with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a city skyline she didn't recognize. The bed beneath her was the size of her entire studio apartment back in Brooklyn, draped in silk sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Panic clawed at her chest as she realized she was wearing clothes that weren't hers, an oversized white button-down shirt that smelled like expensive cologne and cedar. Her own clothes were nowhere to be seen. "Think, Amara, think," she whispered, pressing her palms against her temples. But there was nothing. The last thing she remembered was boarding a plane to Seoul for a teaching position at an international school. She'd been so excited, had spent months preparing, learning basic Korean phrases, researching the culture. After that, a complete void. The door opened without warning. Amara's head snapped up, and her heart nearly stopped. A man stood in the doorway, and calling him handsome would be a criminal understatement. He was tall and lean, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit that hugged his frame like it was custom-made, which it probably was. His face was all sharp angles and smooth planes, with dark eyes that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. His black hair was styled back, with a few rebellious strands falling across his forehead. But it wasn't his looks that made her blood run cold. It was the way he stood, with an authority that suggested he was used to being obeyed, and the cold calculation in his eyes that said he'd seen things most people only had nightmares about. "You're awake," he said in perfect English, though his accent carried a melodic Korean lilt. His voice was smooth, almost gentle, which somehow made him more terrifying. "Who are you?" Amara demanded, pulling the sheets up to her chin despite being fully clothed. "Where am I? What did you do to me?" The man stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "My name is Kang Minyu. You're in my home in Seoul, and I didn't do anything to you. I saved your life." "Saved my—" Amara shook her head, immediately regretting it as pain lanced through her skull. "I don't understand. What happened? Why can't I remember anything?" Minyu approached the bed slowly, as if trying not to spook a frightened animal. He pulled a chair from the corner and sat down, maintaining what he probably thought was a respectful distance. Up close, Amara could see a thin scar running along his jawline and the way his eyes held something dark and weary. "3 days ago, you were caught in the crossfire of a situation that didn't concern you," he said carefully. "You were drugged, likely with a combination of Rohypnol and something else. The people who took you intended to sell you. My men intervened." The words hit Amara like physical blows. "Sell me? What are you talking about? This is insane." "You were at a nightclub in Gangnam," Minyu continued, his voice steady. "Do you remember that?" Amara squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force the memories to surface. There was something, a flash of neon lights, music pounding so loud it vibrated in her chest, someone offering her a drink. A woman with a kind smile and sharp eyes. Maybe, it's all foggy. "The woman who gave you the drink worked for a trafficking ring. They target foreign women, especially those who are new to the country and don't speak Korean fluently." Minyu's jaw tightened. "My organization has been tracking them for months." "Your organization," Amara repeated slowly, her mind struggling to piece together what he was telling her. Then it hit her. The way he carried himself, the obvious wealth, the casual mention of his men intervening. "You're a criminal." Minyu's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I prefer businessman with unconventional methods." "Oh my God." Amara scrambled backward on the bed until her back hit the headboard. "You're Mafia, Korean Mafia. I've been kidnapped by the actual Korean Mafia." "You haven't been kidnapped. You're being protected," Minyu corrected, though his tone suggested he knew how ridiculous that sounded. "The people who took you are part of a larger syndicate. When my men retrieved you, we made enemies. Those enemies now know your face. If I let you leave, you'd be dead within 24 hours. So I'm a prisoner. You're alive. The certainty in his voice sent a chill down Amara's spine. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but found only a grim sincerity that was somehow worse than if he'd been lying. I want to call the embassy, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Or the police, someone who can actually help me. The police have members on the syndicate's payroll, Minyu replied. And the embassy will process your request for help in approximately 2 to 3 weeks, during which time you'll be vulnerable and alone. Is that a risk you're willing to take? Amara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was a 26-year-old woman who'd worked 3 jobs to save enough money to move to Seoul, who'd overcome every obstacle life had thrown at her, who'd survived being raised by a single mother in one of the roughest neighborhoods in New York. She wasn't going to break now. Why should I trust anything you say? She asked. You're a criminal. For all I know, you're the one who arranged for me to be drugged. Something flickered in Minyu's eyes, anger, maybe, or hurt. If I wanted to harm you, I've had 3 days to do it while you were unconscious. Instead, I had my personal doctor treat you, kept you in my own room to ensure your safety, and have posted guards outside to protect you. Your own room? Amara glanced around with fresh horror. This is your bedroom. Where else would I put you? The guest rooms are on lower floors, easier to breach. Here, you're surrounded by my most trusted men. He stood, straightening his jacket. I'll have food sent up. You need to eat and regain your strength. We'll talk more when you're feeling better. Wait, Amara called out as he headed for the door. Minyu paused, glancing back over his shoulder. What happens now? How long do I have to stay here? The look he gave her was equal parts gentle and terrifying. Until it's safe, which may be a very long time. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. After he left, Amara sat in the enormous bed, her mind racing. She tried to piece together the fragments of memory that remained, landing at Incheon Airport, the excitement of finally being in Seoul, meeting up with someone from the teaching program who'd offered to show her around. What was her name? Sarah, Sandra. The memories scattered like smoke every time she tried to grasp them. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened to reveal a young woman carrying a tray of food. She couldn't have been older than 22, with delicate features and nervous energy. Hello, the woman said in accented English. Mr. Kang asked me to bring you breakfast. I'm Jisoo. Amara watched as Jisoo set the tray on the bedside table. It was loaded with a variety of dishes: rice, soup, grilled fish, kimchi, and several side dishes she didn't recognize. The smell made her stomach growl despite her fear. Thank you, Amara said quietly. Jisoo, can I ask you something? The young woman hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door. Maybe, what is it? Is he telling the truth about why I'm here? Jisoo's expression softened with what looked like genuine sympathy. Mr. Kang doesn't lie. He may not tell you everything, but what he says is always true. She moved toward the door, then paused. He's not a good man, but he's not evil either. In our world, that's the best you can hope for. After Jisoo left, Amara forced herself to eat, knowing she'd need strength for whatever came next. The food was delicious, each dish perfectly prepared, but it tasted like ash in her mouth. She was trapped in a stranger's home, in a foreign country, with no memory of how she'd gotten here and no clear path to escape. The man holding her claimed to be protecting her, but he was still a criminal, someone who operated outside the law, who probably had blood on his hands. And yet, some instinct whispered that he was telling the truth. Amara stood on shaky legs and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. Seoul stretched out in every direction, a maze of buildings and lights and lives being lived. Somewhere down there was the life she was supposed to have, teaching children, exploring a new culture, building something for herself. Instead, she was here, in the bed of a man who called himself her savior but refused to let her leave. The door opened again, and Minyu returned, this time carrying a laptop. I thought you might want proof, he said, setting it on the bed and opening it to reveal a news article. About what happened to you. Amara sat down and read the headline, her blood running cold. Foreign national rescued from trafficking ring in Gangnam district. 3 dead, 5 arrested. The article was brief, lacking details, but it confirmed parts of Minu's story. She scrolled through, seeing mentions of a violent confrontation, unnamed rescuers, and the victim being taken for medical treatment. The victim, Amara said quietly, that's me. Yes. She looked up at him, really looked, trying to see past the expensive suit and cold demeanor. What do you want from me? Nothing, Minu said, and she believed him. I want you to stay alive, that's all. And then what? I just live here in your bedroom, forever. We'll figure it out, he replied, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that told her he didn't have a plan either. As night fell over Seoul, Amara lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of her new reality. Somewhere in this city were people who wanted her dead. Standing between her and them was a man who claimed to be her protector, but was also, by his own admission, a criminal. She thought about her mother back in Brooklyn, probably worried sick. About the teaching job she'd never get to start. About the life she'd planned that had evaporated in the span of a drugged drink and a violent rescue. But mostly, she thought about Minu's eyes, the darkness in them, the weight they carried, and the way they'd softened just slightly when he looked at her. Whatever happened next, Amara knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be simple again. The first week passed in a strange sort of limbo. Amara spent her days confined to Minu's quarters, which, she discovered, included not just the bedroom but a private sitting room, a bathroom that resembled a luxury spa, and a small office lined with books in Korean, English, and Japanese. She wasn't locked in exactly, but the guards stationed outside made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. Minu visited twice a day, always punctual, always impeccably dressed. He brought her things, clothes in her size, books, a laptop with restricted internet access, toiletries. He never touched her, never came closer than the chair he'd claimed as his during their conversations. And he always asked the same question. Do you remember anything more? The answer was always fragments, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. A blonde woman named Sandra who'd met her at the airport. A nightclub called Azure. Hands grabbing her as the world tilted sideways. And screaming, so much screaming. On the 8th day, Amara woke to find Minu already in the sitting room, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking rapid Korean, his voice low and dangerous. Even without understanding the words, she could hear the threat in them. When he noticed her, he ended the call abruptly. Good morning, he said, as if she hadn't just witnessed whatever that was. Who was that? Amara asked, wrapping the silk robe tighter around herself. She'd grown bolder in her confinement, less willing to simply accept his non-answers. Business, Minu replied, which told her nothing. Your business, or the business of keeping me alive. His lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. Sometimes they're the same thing. He gestured to the small dining table where breakfast had already been laid out. Eat, we need to talk. Amara's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever followed those words, but she sat, picking at the steamed dumplings while Minu settled across from her. The situation has changed, he began, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The syndicate knows you're here. They've made 2 attempts to breach the building in the last 48 hours. The dumpling turned to stone in Amara's mouth. 2 attempts, and you're just now telling me. I didn't want to frighten you unnecessarily. My security held. You were never in danger. I'm always in danger. Amara shoved her plate away, anger flaring hot in her chest. I'm trapped here in a foreign country with no way out and people trying to kill me. Don't patronize me by pretending I'm safe. Minu's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a crack in that perfect control. You're right, I apologize. The apology caught her off guard. She'd expected defensiveness, not accountability. The syndicate has put a price on your head, he continued. 500 million won. approximately 375,000 US dollars. That's enough to motivate every desperate criminal in Seoul. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. Why? I didn't do anything. I can't even remember what happened. Because you survived. Because my organization interfered with their operation and cost them money. You're not just a witness anymore, you're a symbol. Letting you live makes them look weak. So what now? I stay locked in here forever. Minyu was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those unreadable eyes. There's another option, a permanent solution. Amara's breath caught. You mean? Not death, he said quickly, reading her fear. Marriage. The word hung in the air between them, like something physical and impossible. Excuse me. If you marry me, you become part of my family, untouchable by syndicate rules. It's an old custom, but it's still respected, even by our enemies. Harming a boss's wife would trigger a war no one wants. Amara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You want me to marry you, a man I've known for 8 days, a criminal. I want you to live, Minyu corrected. This is how. That's insane. She stood abruptly, packing the length of the room. There has to be another way, witness protection or moving me to another city or... The syndicate has reach across Asia and connections in Europe and North America. Witness protection would buy you maybe 6 months. His voice was flat, factual. I'm offering you a life. As your wife, your possession. As my partner, he said, and there was something fierce in his tone now. I'm not asking you to love me, I'm not even asking you to like me, but I can keep you safe. I can give you freedom within boundaries. I can give you a future. Amara pressed her hands against the cool glass of the window, looking out at the city that was supposed to have been her new beginning. What kind of future is that? Living with a man I don't know, surrounded by criminals, always looking over my shoulder. The kind where you're alive to see tomorrow. She turned to face him, and for the first time she really looked at Kang Minyu, not as her captor or her savior, but as a person. He was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 32 or 33, with exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, bore old scars that spoke of violence. But there was also something else in his expression, something that looked almost like loneliness. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. You could just pay them off or hand me over. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger? Minyu stood, walking to the window to stand beside her. Up close, she could smell his cologne, something dark and woody that reminded her of forests after rain. My sister was 17 when she was taken by a trafficking ring, he said, his voice carefully controlled. I found her 3 days later. She was alive, but... He stopped, jaw clenching. She was never the same. She took her own life 6 months after. Amara's anger dissolved, replaced by something that felt uncomfortably like sympathy. I'm sorry. I've spent the last 10 years destroying every trafficking operation I can find. The syndicate you stumbled into is the biggest I've encountered. When my men found you, when I saw you unconscious in that room. He turned to look at her fully. I saw Jiwoo, my sister, and I knew I couldn't let the same thing happen again. So I'm your second chance, Amara said softly. Your redemption. Perhaps, does it matter? She wanted to say yes, that intentions mattered, that she wasn't a prop in his personal tragedy. But looking at the raw pain in his eyes, she found she couldn't be that cruel. I need time to think, she said instead. You have 24 hours. After that, the syndicate's next attempt might succeed. That night, Amara lay awake in Minyu's bed, the bed she'd been sleeping in while he took the couch in the sitting room. A detail Jisoo had let slip, and tried to make an impossible decision. Marriage to a stranger, to a criminal, to a man who'd saved her life but also held her captive. She thought about her mother's advice, given years ago after her father had left. Baby girl, sometimes survival means making choices that don't feel like choices at all. Sometimes you just do what you have to do and figure out the rest later. Around midnight, she heard a sound from the sitting room. Moving quietly, she opened the door a crack and saw Minyu at the desk, his jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, surrounded by papers and laptop screens. He looked different like this, less like an untouchable crime boss and more like a tired man carrying the weight of the world. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across the darkness. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can you?" "I rarely do anymore." Amara opened the door wider, stepping into the room. "Tell me about her, about Jiwoo." And he did. He told her about a little girl who loved art and hated math, who wanted to be a fashion designer, who trusted too easily and smiled too quickly. He told her about finding her, about the light dying in her eyes, about the guilt that consumed him for not protecting her better. "She used to say I was too serious," Minyu said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "That I needed to learn to laugh more. She was right." "What would she say about this? About your proposal?" He considered the question carefully. "She'd probably say I was being dramatic, that there had to be a better way, but she'd also understand why I'm doing it." Amara sat down in the chair across from him, the same chair he always used during their conversations. "I have conditions." Minyu's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're accepting." "I'm negotiating. There's a difference." She folded her hands in her lap, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "First, this is a business arrangement. I want my own room once it's safe, my own space." "Agreed." "Second, I want to continue my education. Take online courses, maybe eventually go back to teaching." "Agreed." "Third, I want to learn Korean properly. And I want to know about your business, not participate, but understand what I'm becoming part of." Minyu leaned back, studying her with something that might have been respect. "The first two are easy. The third is dangerous. Knowledge in my world is often a death sentence. I'd rather die knowing than live in ignorance." A long pause then. "Agreed. Anything else?" "Yes." Amara met his gaze steadily. "I want your honesty, always. No matter how ugly the truth is, I need to know I can trust at least that much." "You have it," Minyu said, and she believed him. "Then I'll marry you." The wedding happened 3 days later in a private ceremony that was more business contract than romantic union. Amara wore a simple white dress that Jisoo had procured, and Minyu wore another of his impeccable black suits. There were no guests except for witnesses required by law, some of Minyu's men she'd seen guarding her door, and the officiant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When Minyu slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple platinum band, Amara felt the full weight of what she'd done. She'd married a stranger, a criminal, a man whose last name she now shared. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, sounding bored. Minyu looked at her, a question in his eyes. Amara gave the slightest nod, and he leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief and chaste, and somehow still sent electricity racing down her spine. When he pulled back, he whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me." "I don't," Amara whispered back. "Not yet, but maybe someday." That night, Amara sat alone in the bedroom, now officially hers, and looked at the ring on her finger. She thought about the teaching job she'd never start, the life she'd planned that had been ripped away. She thought about her mother, who still didn't know where she was or what had happened. But she also thought about Minyu's sister, about all the women who didn't survive, about the second chance she'd been given even if it came wrapped in impossible circumstances. She was Amara Kang now, wife to a mafia boss, protected and imprisoned in equal measure. And somehow, despite everything, she was alive. Outside her window, Seoul glittered like a promise or a threat, she wasn't sure which. But she'd survived this long. She could survive whatever came next. She had to believe that. Because the alternative was unthinkable.